You know, when you think of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh, one name probably pops into your head first: Tutankhamun. But here's the thing: he's the most famous pharaoh in history well, for almost nothing he did while he was alive. So today, we're going to dig into the story of King Tut, an icon not by some grand design, but by a stunning accident of history.
So our story actually starts, not in ancient Egypt, but way more recently, in 1922. Picture this: archaeologist Howard Carter, after years of searching, makes this tiny hole in a sealed doorway. He holds up a candle, and his partner asks him, "Can you see anything?" His answer has become legendary. Yes, wonderful things. I mean, he was the first person to see inside that tomb in over 3,200 years, and what he saw would absolutely captivate the entire planet.
But discovering all those wonderful things, well, it left everyone with an even bigger question. How was this treasure so perfectly preserved when so many others weren't? And really, why is Tutankhamun, a pretty minor king who was on the throne for just 10 years, the most famous pharaoh of all time? The answer, it turns out, is a wild story of religious revolution, political backstabbing, and a truly remarkable accident.
Okay, so to really get the legend, you first have to understand the boy, the kid behind that solid gold mask. He was born into one of the most chaotic periods in all of Egyptian history, a kingdom right in the middle of a massive spiritual crisis. You see, Tutankhamun was born into what was basically a kingdom in heresy. His father, the pharaoh Akhenaten, had done something unthinkable. He just upended centuries of religious tradition. He had the name of the most powerful god, Amun, literally chiseled off of monuments, moved the entire capital to a new city out in the desert, and declared that there was only one true god, the Aten, the physical disk of the sun.
And you can basically understand his entire life's mission just by looking at this one thing: his name change. He was born Tutankhaten, which means the living image of Aten. But when he became pharaoh at just 9 years old, yeah, 9, one of his first big moves, with some heavy guidance from his advisors, was to completely reject his father's revolution. He changed his name to Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun, a huge symbolic move to put the old god back on top.
But here's the thing. Behind that divine title was, well, a really fragile teenager. What's been called a virtual autopsy, using over 2,000 CT scans, has revealed a ton of health problems, a lot of them probably from inbreeding. He had a club foot, a cleft palate, and he suffered from severe recurring malaria. You know, they found over 130 walking canes in his tomb. They weren't just for show. He actually needed them to get around. This tells us he probably lived in chronic pain and could have never, ever ridden a chariot into battle like the art in his tomb shows.
So what this all means is that Tut's short time as pharaoh wasn't about, epic battles or conquering new lands. It was all about restoration. His entire goal was to try and heal a spiritually broken nation.
This quote here, it comes directly from a stone slab he had made. And you should think of it as basically a piece of political PR. It's describing the chaos and the feeling that the gods had literally abandoned Egypt during his father's time. His mission was crystal clear. He had to restore Ma'at, that ancient Egyptian idea of divine order, truth, and cosmic balance. So, with his powerful advisors, an old court official named Ai, and the army commander, Horemheb, pulling the strings, the boy king systematically reversed everything his father had done. The capital was moved back to Thebes, the old temples were reopened and fixed up, and the incredibly powerful priests of Amun were given all their influence back. He was basically pulling Egypt back from the edge of total social collapse.
But right when it seemed like things were finally calming down, the young king suddenly died. He was only 19, and he left no heir, which threw the entire court into a crisis, a succession crisis that honestly reads like a modern political thriller.
For years, everybody speculated about murder, right, or some dramatic chariot crash. But modern science actually points to something a lot more ordinary, though no less tragic. It looks like he probably had a bad fall, which resulted in a severe leg fracture. And for a young guy who is already weak from bone disease and malaria, that kind of infection would have been a death sentence.
Okay, and this is where the story gets absolutely wild. His young widow, Queen Ankhesenamun, was under enormous pressure to remarry and legitimize a new pharaoh. So she made this unbelievable gamble. She secretly wrote a letter to Egypt's #1 enemy, the Hittites, and asked their king to send one of his sons to marry her and become the new pharaoh of Egypt.
And the fallout from this? It was fast, and it was brutal. The Hittite king was suspicious, but he eventually agreed and sent his son, Prince Zenanza. But the prince, he never made it. He was murdered on his way to Egypt, almost certainly by a powerful group that refused to have a foreigner on the throne. This move cleared the way for the old advisor, Ai, to marry the widowed queen himself and snatch the throne. And what happened to Ankhesenamun? After this, she just vanishes from history.
So let's circle back. If he was this minor, sickly king whose biggest accomplishment was just undoing what his dad did, why on earth is he the most famous pharaoh of all? Well, the answer was buried in the sand.
The truth is, his immortality was a total fluke, an accident. See, ancient grave robbers knew exactly what they were doing. They systematically looted the huge, obvious tombs of the great pharaohs like Ramses the Great. But Tut's tomb was different. It was small, probably a tomb for a nobleman that was repurposed in a hurry after a sudden death. And then, soon after he was buried, workers building a different tomb nearby built their huts right on top of his, completely hiding it from view for over 3,000 years.
So when Carter finally got into the burial chamber, what he found was just this incredible series of nested layers, like a set of ancient Egyptian nesting dolls. It's the perfect description. He had to painstakingly take apart 3 enormous golden shrines, then open a heavy stone sarcophagus just to get to the coffins themselves, and inside that, there were 3 of them, each one fitting perfectly inside the last.
And right at the very center, holding the king's mummy and that iconic death mask, was the final coffin. It was made of over 110 kilograms, that's 243 pounds, of solid gold. Just that one artifact alone, you can imagine the awe that Carter must have felt when he first laid eyes on it. And you know, this might be the most mind-blowing part of it all. Over 5,000 objects were crammed into this tiny tomb. We're talking chariots, furniture, board games, even the mummified remains of his 2 stillborn daughters. It was a perfect time capsule of royal life, and all of it, every single piece, was only meant for the king's journey into the next world. It was never meant to be seen by living eyes again.
So the discovery in 1922 basically resurrected Tutankhamun. It transformed a forgotten boy king into what he is today, a modern, global superstar.
Now, let's get one thing straight. There was no real curse. Howard Carter, the guy who actually broke the seal, lived for another 17 years. But when his financial backer, Lord Carnarvon, died suddenly in Cairo from an infected mosquito bite, the press went into a frenzy. They created this story of the mummy's curse, and that legend just cemented Tut's fame and kicked off a worldwide obsession with all things ancient Egypt.
From fashion and architecture in the 20s to Steve Martin's hilarious comedy sketch in the 70s, King Tut became a genuine cultural phenomenon. His treasures have toured the world, seen by literally millions of people. And now, for the first time in a century, nearly all 5,400 artifacts are going to be displayed together in the new Grand Egyptian Museum in Cairo. His legacy is just going to keep going.
So in the end, we're left with this really powerful irony. Tutankhamun is famous not for the life he lived, but for the tomb he left behind. And that tomb only survived because the pharaohs who came after him were so desperate to get away from his family's controversial history that they tried to erase him completely. By making him unimportant enough to forget, they accidentally made him immortal. His story is just a powerful reminder that history isn't just written by the great and powerful. Sometimes it's written by the lucky and by the forgotten. And it leaves you with this final, really fascinating question. What other incredible stories are still out there, just waiting for their lucky break, buried right underneath the sand?